That's right. The Bexar County Sheriff's Office just wrapped up this press conference a few minutes ago. The purpose, to reveal some of the names and the causes of death for all three of the victims. Sheriff Salazar told us the 10-year-old girl's death as a homicide that was ruled as a homicide by the medical examiner, and the death of 16-year-old Alexa Montez is also ruled a homicide, and the death of 37-year-old Nichol Olsen, who was the mother of at least one of the girls, has been ruled a suicide. Now, investigators say a man who lives at the house, who we believe is the owner and was romantically involved with Olsen, came home last Thursday morning and found Olsen and the two girls with gunshot wounds. There were apparently no reports of gunshot sounds the night before, but when deputies responded to the home on Anaqua Springs Road in the Anaqua Springs Ranch subdivision around 9 a.m. Thursday, they found all three upstairs. The home is in a gated community on the northwest side near I-10 and Bernie Stage Road near Leon Springs. Now, a weapon was also recovered from the home, and the sheriff's office says the case is far from over. They're still working to solve the two murders and not ruling out the possibility there could have been another player in this case. They're looking at camera records, video surveillance, social media, cell records, and also cell tower information to figure out where phones were when certain messages were sent. Now, investigators are asking anyone with any information, no matter how small you may think it is, including neighbors with video surveillance outside of their homes, to give them a call. That number is 210-335-6070, or email the sheriff's office at bcsotips@bear.org. That'll go to their homicide division. And we'll have more coming up later today on KENS 5 Eyewitness News at 5. Live at the sheriff's office headquarters, Jeremy Baker, KENS 5 Eyewitness News.
January 10, 2019. Anaqua Springs Ranch. A gated, 2,700-acre estate community just outside San Antonio, Texas. Charles Edward Wheeler, 31 years old, pulls into his driveway and walks into his own home. Nothing prepares him for what he finds upstairs. His girlfriend, Nichol Olsen, 37. Her daughters, Alexa Denise Montez, 16, and London Sophia Bribiescas, just 10 years old. All three, on the second floor. All three, gone. He calls 911. And that call will be the beginning of one of the most contradicted investigations in Texas history. Because for the next 7 years, the sheriff investigating this case would tell 3 different stories about what happened inside that house. And in March of 2026, brand new evidence would force him to tell a 4th. What really happened on Anaqua Springs Ranch that night? Stay with us. Because the answer is not what you think. Welcome back to OB True Crime. I'm your host, and today we're breaking down the case that just won't stay closed. Before we get into it, hit that subscribe button, and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from today. Now, let's get into it. To understand what happened inside that house, you have to understand how these two people ended up under the same roof in the first place. Charles Edward Wheeler wasn't your average San Antonio homeowner. Before he was 25, he was a professional rodeo competitor, chasing prize money on the circuit. When that career wound down, he took his winnings and started a security gate company. He sold it when he was just 24 years old. Not satisfied, he pivoted into oil field services, and by the time he turned 31, Wheeler owned a home worth over $1 million, sitting on nearly 3 acres inside the gates of Anaqua Springs Ranch. In the driveway sat a Range Rover. Next to it, a Maserati. By every outward measure, Charles Wheeler had built himself a life most people only dream about. Nichol Olsen's story looked very different. A 37-year-old hairstylist, raising 2 daughters largely on her own. Alexa Denise Montez, 16 years old, a sophomore at Clark High School. And London Sophia Bribiescas, just 10. The two met the way so many couples do now. Not at a bar, not through friends. On Instagram. Wheeler saw a post, sent a message, and what started as a direct message turned into a relationship. Before long, Nichol and her daughters moved out of their old life and into Wheeler's sprawling estate. To the outside world, it looked like Nichol had found her happy ending. A gated community. A beautiful home. A provider. But on the night of January 9, 2019, that image cracked. According to Wheeler's own account, the two got into an argument. He told investigators he left the house around 10 p.m., choosing to drive off and spend the night at a relative's home instead of staying to work things out. He would later say it wasn't the first time tension had boiled over between them. But this night, he says, he simply walked away. What happened inside that house after he left is where the story gets disturbing. Just after 11 p.m., Nichol's cell phone made 5 separate attempts to call 911. 5 calls, in the middle of the night, from a woman investigators believe was already in crisis. 4 of those calls disconnected before a dispatcher ever picked up. Only 1 call connected. And when it did, it failed to generate a usable location for responders to trace. No address. No confirmation of where the call was even coming from. Just a connection, and then silence. Whatever was said, whatever was happening in that house at that exact moment, has never been fully revealed to the public. The next confirmed detail comes the following morning. January 10th. Charles Wheeler says he returned home after spending the night away, expecting an ordinary Thursday. Instead, he walked upstairs and found Nichol, Alexa, and London all dead. He called 911 himself, and deputies from the Behar County Sheriff's Office arrived to a scene no one could have prepared for. When the medical examiner's office finally issued its findings, the ruling shocked the community. Alexa and London's deaths were officially classified as homicides. They had been murdered. But Nichol's death was ruled a suicide. According to that ruling, the official story was this. A mother, alone in that house after her boyfriend walked out, took the lives of both of her daughters, and then turned the gun on herself. To friends and family who knew Nichol Olsen, that explanation didn't just seem unlikely. It seemed impossible. And that's where this case should have ended. A tragic, painful, but closed chapter. Except it didn't end there. Not even close. Despite the official finding of murder-suicide, Salazar refused to sign off. He came forward publicly and said something that would define this case for years to come. He said he was not ready to call Nichol Olsen a murderer. Not ready to label her as someone who killed her own children. That single statement kept this case alive in the public eye, and kept investigators digging long after most departments would have moved on. Then, in December of 2019, a search warrant surfaced that changed everything. Investigators wrote that the crime scene was, in their words, very complex, and that there was possible evidence the deaths were not a murder-suicide at all. They used the phrase, possibly a triple murder. The warrant sought electronic evidence, phone records, digital communications, anything that could establish who was really in that house, and when. And while all of this was unfolding, something quietly happened that a lot of people missed. In July of 2019, just 6 months after 3 people died inside that home, the property sold. $975,000. The house where Nichol, Alexa, and London took their last breaths was back on the market and flipped within months. But the biggest gut punch came in January of 2021. Sources close to the investigation revealed that in the hours leading up to the deaths, the paternity of one of Nichol's daughters had come into question. Messages recovered from that night suggested a conversation was happening, a conversation about who a child's biological father really was, in the final hours before 3 lives ended. It's the kind of detail that turns a tragedy into a motive. Both fathers responded the only way they felt they could. Alexa's father, Carlos Montez Jr., and London's father, Hector Bribiescas, each filed wrongful death lawsuits against Charles Wheeler. Their argument was that Wheeler acted with gross negligence, leaving a firearm accessible inside a home where Nichol was, by their account, in an escalating and dangerous state of mind. Around this same time, it was confirmed that at least one life insurance policy connected to the case had already been paid out. There was one more detail buried in the reporting that deserves attention. Just days before her death, Nichol had toured an apartment. The Grand at the Dominion, only 6 miles from Wheeler's home. Records show she'd been looking at a 3-bedroom floor plan, with a move-in timeframe already discussed. To some investigators, that single detail speaks volumes. A woman planning an apartment tour, mapping out a future with her daughters, does not fit the profile of someone about to end her own life, and theirs. Then, in November of 2020, a strange footnote emerged. Charles Wheeler was arrested in Austin following a traffic accident and charged with driving while intoxicated. That charge would eventually be dismissed by prosecutors in July of 2021. On its own, it may mean nothing. But in a case built almost entirely on one man's version of events, every crack in his credibility matters. That same November, Sheriff Salazar told the public his investigation was nearly finished. After combing through cell phone records, GPS data, surveillance footage, and forensic testing, he said he had found nothing to contradict the medical examiner's original ruling. As far as the official record was concerned, the case was murder-suicide, and nothing more. But not everyone was ready to accept that. A group of retired federal agents, including a former FBI agent named Tuletta Copeland, formed a nonprofit called Project Absentis. Their mission was simple: bridge the gap between grieving families and law enforcement, and keep pressure on a case they believed still had answers buried inside it. Copeland went on record saying she did not believe Nichol Olsen was a murderer, and that critical evidence still needed to be examined before anyone could close this book for good. 7 years in, and the case still refused to stay closed. For years, this case sat frozen. A ruling nobody fully believed, but nobody could overturn either. Then, on March 17, 2026, everything changed again. A 36-page sheriff's report, newly obtained, cracked this case wide open. And what it revealed inside that house is hard to ignore. Investigators documented multiple firearms scattered throughout the property. A revolver, found near Nichol's body. Several other pistols, different calibers, stored in other rooms of the home. And a single projectile, pulled directly out of a wall in the upstairs hallway. Not a couch cushion. Not a mattress. A wall. The report also confirmed something that had never been publicly detailed before. Gunshot residue testing wasn't just performed on Nichol and her daughters. It was performed on Charles Wheeler too. The man who says he wasn't even in the house that night. But the most disturbing revelations came from the blood evidence. Investigators pulled swabs from the shower drain in the master suite. From the large soaking tub in that same bathroom. And from a separate restroom, downstairs. Sheriff Salazar addressed this directly, saying investigators were specifically looking for blood in those drains. And what they found led him to make one of the most chilling statements of this entire 7-year investigation. Salazar said there is a high probability that one of the victims in this case was not killed instantly by the gunshot. That this victim, in his words, moved around during the course of the crime, leaving blood evidence behind as they went. Investigators traced that blood along the upstairs hallway, down the staircase, toward the garage door. Think about what that means. Someone in that house, after being shot, was still alive. Still moving. Trying to get somewhere. The official story has always been a quiet, contained tragedy. Blood in a stairwell heading toward a garage door tells a very different kind of story. And then there's the footage. Gate cameras at the entrance to Anaqua Springs Ranch captured Wheeler's truck leaving the neighborhood that night. But the video never clearly shows who was actually behind the wheel. So here's where this case stands, in 2026. Multiple firearms. A bullet pulled from a wall. Gunshot residue on the one man who says he wasn't there. Blood evidence suggesting movement after the shooting. And camera footage that can't confirm who was driving away in the dark. You'd think all of this would be enough to reopen the case. It's not. Sheriff Salazar confirmed that despite everything in that report, the case remains officially closed. In his own words, as the case stands now, it is ruled a double murder and a suicide at the hands of Nichol Olsen. He also revealed that the FBI, the Texas Rangers, and private investigators hired by one of the families have all reviewed this case independently. Every single one of them came back with the same conclusion. Nothing found to contradict the original ruling. So we're left with a sheriff describing evidence that sounds like it belongs in a cover-up, while insisting, on the record, that there is no cover-up at all. A revolver by her side. A bullet in the wall. Blood on the stairs, heading toward the garage. And a case, closed. What do you think really happened inside that house? If you've got a theory on what really happened at Anaqua Springs Ranch, drop it in the comments. We read every single one. If this case pulled you in, make sure you're subscribed, because next time we're diving into a case just as tangled. A different family. A different house. The same haunting question. Was justice ever really served? See you in the next one.